Hello, and welcome to our panel discussion on universal competencies and empowering the workforce development across industry. My name is Colin Reynolds. I'm the VP of Learning with the Learning Economy Foundation, and I'm joined today by a panel of experts and specialists across a variety of industries. So earlier this year, the Learning Economy Foundation had the pleasure of facilitating the OSN 2021 Spring Skills Pilots. The goals of this pilot were to create libraries of rich skill descriptors, or RSDs as we'll refer to them throughout our conversation, which is a new machine-readable schema for expressing skills and competencies. And also, we had the opportunity to pressure test the Open Skills Management Tool, or OSMIT as we'll refer to it throughout conversation. This is a tool for publishing and sharing libraries of RSDs. These pilot teams spent several months working towards these goals, creating and publishing hundreds of RSDs in a rapid sprint. During this panel, we'll have an opportunity to hear from each of the pilot participants about their pilot experience and have an in-depth discussion on universal competencies. So we'll go through and have each pilot lead share a little bit about their pilot experience as we'll be advancing through slides. So first up, we have Naomi Boyer, who is an educational designer and the director of the Ed Design Lab. Naomi.
What changed?
Come off chat. That's always important. Come off mute. Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you. I'm Naomi Boyer. As Colin said, I'm with Education Design Lab. Colin, can we go to the next slide?
I did, but they were going through their microphone.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. I'm a director over credentialing products for them there. I've been with Education Design Lab for about 2 years, and we were so honored to be able to participate in the rich skill descriptor pilots. Lots of acronyms that you might hear throughout the time.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, we're hearing some additional speakers. Thank you. Lots of acronyms are associated with this work. Rich skill descriptors, which we'll hear RSD. You heard Colin mention OSMIT, which is the Open Skills Management Tool. I'll do my best to stay out of all of those acronyms. But Education Design Lab is a nonprofit, and we focus on co-designing with our partners scalable models that really deal with some of the challenges we're facing in this space between learning and the hiring ecosystem. We really use an equity lens to our work, and we use human-centered design thinking because we're really focused on addressing affordability, flexibility, relevance, portability, and visibility. We believe that it is a moral imperative to help learner earners become visible in the digital skills marketplace. In our pilot, we focused on the 21st century skills. And I think I had one of the pilots that had the most collaborators that were a part of it. We had lots of friends with us at the table, and you can see the number of collaborators that are there. Credly, National Student Clearinghouse, Everfi, Tailspin, Muzzy Lane, Matrix, Badger, Credential Engine, and HR Open Standards, as well as IMS Global participated with us in this work. Colin, next slide, please. So the lab has a 21st century skills competency framework. And our goal as part of this pilot was to take that framework and turn it into a tangible digital open skills library. And that's what we did. So the images that you see on the slide, those are our 8 digital micro-credentials. Those are around the 21st century skills. These are skills that are transferable across organizations. They're boundary spanning. They boundary span industry. They span between education and employment. They span technologies. And really maximizing the opportunity from this framework to make it scalable, to disseminate it, was a huge portion of our work. Each of those 8 digital credentials has 4 sub-competencies associated with it, and there's interrelationships. And it's often hard to express how those skill statements relate to each other, as well as relate to the overall framework. Next slide, please, Colin. So our work was then to take that framework and turn it into a collection, which we did in the Open Skills Management Tool. we didn't anticipate this, but we ended up with two separate collections. Because as you're building out your skills library as a collection, you tend to decontextualize, which was one of our learnings, the skill statements. And so we did a version that was attached to our original framework and mirrored our 23 subcompetencies. But we also unpacked those 23 subcompetencies into specific skill statements that then ended up representing 52 separate skill statements. Now, why are each one of those important? Because the specific unpacked ones allow for a greater level of granularity that then can connect, remember, we're boundary spanning to different elements to be able to create a comprehensive whole and share that language. For those of you that were in the general session, talking about translation of skills across many of the boundaries that currently exist. So you can see on my collaborator insights list over here, I know my time is short, so I want to compress what I'm saying. We can come back to this in questions. You can see many of the insights that were gained as part of that work. And the lessons that were learned is how important it is to contextualize skills. And we had to push at the limits in order to do that. Open, open, open. Its openness allows for the sharing between organizations. And it's only through this sharing that we're really going to maximize, whether it's internal to a department within an organization, whether it's between fields and industries, or whether it's between organizations. The openness of these skills with their rich metadata is what's going to allow us to move forward. And then the need for the real-time connectors. And I'm going to kind of leave it there because I know we have a lot of conversation coming, and I'm going to pass it back to Colin so our other speakers can introduce themselves.
Wonderful. Thank you, Naomi. And I really appreciate the emphasis you put on open and making the connections between skills, between industries, and really trying to make it as accessible for everybody who wants to engage in this work as possible. Our next group is actually a team from Arizona State University, as led by Charmaine Farber. So Charmaine will have the floor. She's a creative technologist and the director of the Learning Future Initiative at ASU. She's joined on her team by Heather Hasley, who is a Learning Futures architect for the Learning Futures Collaboratory at Arizona State. Charmaine.
Actually, I'm going to hand it over to Heather just to start us off.
Wonderful.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Hasley, co-executive director of the Learning Futures Collaboratory, and our group imagines the future of learning 3 to 5 years from now and builds proof of concepts and prototypes and minimum viable products at scale to be able to get us to that future state, as well as architects really what the university needs to do in order to actually get to that future state and then drive a path towards it. And we do this in collective action communities of practice. So we are one of the units on campus where people can come together and collaborate across our very large institution, 120 plus thousand students, means that it can be difficult to collaborate sometimes across such a large institution. So our group actually works to make sure that people are working together towards a common goal. And one of those common goals is really to start to think about how we skill map our curriculum and how we start to really prepare our learners for the workforce of the future and the things that the workforce of the future is going to need, which leads directly to this idea of having a set of meta competencies that an ASU graduate comes out with, so that an employer can say, every ASU graduate has this set of competencies, and we know that when we employ someone, that they will come with a baseline of these meta competencies. It also allows for alignment across our entire institution to say, we may be doing things, as Naomi said, in context, but it actually rolls up to this larger set of competencies that we have across the university. This work started about 2 years ago, and we did a survey of over 50 different competency frameworks from across the world, employers, higher ed institutions, groups like Naomi's, and we took them all and we actually said, what are the common threads here? What is everyone putting together, and did an analysis and came up with a set of ASU meta competencies. We also use this pilot as the ability for us to come together as an institution around this, because it seems so large to skill map 120,000 learners for 120,000 learners and such a large curriculum. So we really use this pilot as a way to bring people together as a rallying point. And so I am going to hand it over to Charmaine, who really led this pilot, to talk about what we did.
Thank you. And I don't know if I can see the correct slide. Okay. Oh, good. I can see that now. Wonderful. Yeah. And so just thinking a little bit about what it was that we did, and to go off of what Heather was saying as well, what we realized is that, sure, this was about the tool, but really the tool was the tangible rallying point, because there were so many people and units around ASU being so gigantic that we're thinking about skills and competencies and thinking about how to move them forward. And so what we really were able to do is collaborate and align with within our own organization, bridging internal groups to accelerate the process. And of course, we want to ensure that students acquire and master the career readiness skills and tackle that, upon graduation, which is why we're here and which is why we're doing that. And so we have let's see what the next slide is. I'm wondering if we are able to, I'm not necessarily seeing, can you go to the next slide?
Yeah, we've got there is a little delay between our
showing
feed
up
and the
with
live
whatever's
one.
on my slides, but that's okay, because we had 3 different teams, and that was the best way to go about accomplishing the goals that we wanted to accomplish. So we had the RSD group, and this group drafted a meta competency list. And what we did is we also thought about sample behaviors with the meta competencies. We had a UX UI group to create a framework and best practices, and really to even focus on who is our user and who are the different users and the different journeys that these users can take. And then the Tech Align group, we have a lot of different technologies happening at ASU around competencies, meta competencies, and skills. So, okay, how do we align them, and how do we provide feedback about what might work and what might not work with the Osmint tool, so that we can, think about adopting some kind of standardization across ASU. And next slide. I don't know what else we have on here. Oh, that's the same slide. We can go next slide.
I think these slides are a little bit off.
Mm-hmm. So if you can, let's skip this slide, because that's like the last slide. Well, and that's okay. Why don't we move on to the next person?
Okay. Yeah, there is a little delay in the live feed from what we're seeing in our team versus what's being broadcast out to the larger group. But we'll have plenty of discussion to come back around. So thank you, Charmaine and Heather, for the overview. It's really, having seen the involvement of the pilots and the broad spectrum of pilot teams, the ASU team was one of the larger groups. And as you mentioned, the alignment there, I think we'll circle back and have some questions and discussion around that. But alignment across even an institution is step one for many. So we'll be curious to hear more about that. Next up, we have Valerie Thomas, who is the lead for the talent mobility strategy for the Government of Canada. Valerie.
Hi, Colin. Thank you so much. So very happy to be here today to share some of the insights from our pilot. As Colin, you mentioned, is the transferable skills for digital government. Next slide, please. So the way that I wanted to really hone in on some of the information that I wanted to share with everyone today is really how we came about designing the pilot. So there were 3 integral components. One of them is that we came into this project armed with about 3.5 years of data from a project that was called GC Talent Cloud, which ran for about 3.5 years in the Government of Canada. That project was an experiment in skills-based staffing. really the notion to reduce barriers for hiring so that we could have a more inclusive public service. And there was a lot of lessons learned around the experimentation that we did with that project. And it was very much a bold new approach for the government to give us the space and the breadth to test this kind of thing. So we knew that we had a lot of insights to share. And we actually, if anybody is interested in checking out some of those insights, particularly when it comes to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have sections of the results on that. You can find it on talent.canada.ca. So we came armed with all this information ready to go. One of the biggest findings from that project was the fact that our recommendation for skills-based hiring and how, to have a more inclusive public service, skills-based hiring is one way to do that. We've also have the Government of Canada Digital Standards Playbook, which is comprised of 10 digital standards that helps to guide individuals creating digital services in a way that best serves Canadians. And there's 10 digital standards there. And each of those standards has aligned and misaligned behaviors. So that uniquely positioned us to say, this is a really interesting framework that we might be able to use as one of the data sources for this OSN pilot. And the other thing that was really interesting about the Government of Canada digital standards is the fact that they were co-created with the public and key stakeholder groups. So they're actually living standards in the fact that they continue to evolve over time. And the behavioral guidance of these aligned and misaligned behaviors, not only does it promote ways of working in alignment with the digital standard construct, but it's really meant for teams to understand what is expected of them when they are applying and embodying the digital standards. And these digital standards are things like, working in the open, designing with users. And one very key point to this is the open skills work is using open standards and solutions. So that was another treasure trove of information that we had. And then the third point was we also had digital competencies, which are effectively digital transferable skills, I should say, that were mapped to the digital standards. So those were the key components that we had in our toolkit, if you will, to help lay the ground or lay the foundation to go into the OSN pilot. We chose going in, actually, if you could just go back to the next slide, or the previous slide, please, Colin. The OSN pilot, we chose the notion of transferable skills for digital government, specifically, because I am very much a huge proponent of transferable skills and the need to have these universal transferable skills in this future of work that we are all living in, but also how they span across a variety of roles and occupations. Most importantly, we saw this as an opportunity to demonstrate how contextualized skills data can provide value. And we've heard this a lot in the session, the Open Skills Summit today, this notion of value and what that means. For us, I guess when we're thinking about value, when the system changes what it values, it changes who it values. And this is an empowering opportunity for all of us and playing in the skills field. And so that was one of the key elements, and also demonstrating what it would look like for all communities, including equity-seeking groups. And our collaborators formerly were Credential Engine. So we had one of the fewest partners on this group, but I did want to give a shout out to Naomi from Education Design Lab, who was a huge supporter of the project, and we followed her coattails quite closely on this project, but also the skills architects at WGU, as well as Learning Economy as well. So thank you so much for everyone who helped us on this project. Next slide, please, Colin. So I'm flying through this very quickly. I don't know why that one's coming up a little bit blurry here, but the what I tried to demonstrate is I'm a very visual person, so I like to see what things look like. What you see on the right-hand side, although it is a little bit, or the left-hand side, sorry, is a little blurry, but that is our collection of our digital transferable skills for digital government. We effectively created 71, I believe, we published 71 individual rich skill descriptors. What you see circled here is that on the left-hand side, collaboration was one of the digital competencies that was then mapped to the digital standard, collaborates with others. We took it upon ourselves, if I'm not mistaken, we were one of the only Canadian pilots in this in this pilot program. So we took it upon ourselves to really look to see where we can poke as many holes as possible from a Canadian perspective, and then just apologize for it afterwards because we are Canadian. But we took this exercise very seriously. And one of the things that we noticed is the alignment of the NOC codes, which is the National Occupation Classification System, versus the SOC codes that the North American system uses. And it's like this notion of how can we create this translation between them, because we all need to talk for it to be truly globally transferable. We all need to be able to translate these taxonomies and these classification systems. So we were definitely able to poke some holes there. But one of the really cool thing is what you see on the right-hand side is the connection between the digital competency mapped to the digital standard. And what you see on the furthest most right-hand side is what we were able to publish through the Credential Finder. So those digital standards are now as published through the Credential Finder as open linked data. And all of that information is now published as an open standard. So we were really pleased about how that turned out. And yeah, so the biggest piece, I guess, that I would just end on is that publishing those digital standards as open link data through Credential Engine just creates that open data link through the digital competencies to the digital standards, and now it's open for everyone to view and use. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Val. And you're correct. You were the only Canadian pilot, and also one of the only pilots working directly or on behalf of a government agency directly. So the work that you did and some of the alignment and challenges that you experienced will help give an insight, and we're all learning through you. So we'll transition now. Thank you all to our presenters for overviewing some of the pilot work and the challenges, successes, and we'll transition now into just some general discussion. So anybody who's watching out there who has a question for anyone in the panelists, please put it in the chat. We do have some questions just to get the conversation going. I think one of the comments that came up here and from the larger keynote and panel was about the impact of this work in the future. And so I know that Charmaine mentioned as part, and Heather as part of the initiative at ASU, is thinking about or imagining the future 3 to 5 years from now, and then trying to work backwards and build frameworks and structures that will help learners be successful. So maybe we'll start there with Charmaine of what do you see as the longer range impact of the work that you did as part of the OSN pilot?
Yeah, I can take that, Colin. And so I think that right now what we're doing is the longer term impact of what we're doing. Well, let's start with the short term. The short term impact is ASU is now working together to actually define a skills taxonomy for the institution that then aligns to industry taxonomies, right? So that's the first step, is to create our taxonomy, map it to our curriculum, and then align it with industry-related taxonomies and other institutional taxonomies. I think in the future, you saw that big Tech Align group that we have, and ASU is actually working on a significant number of technologies, particularly in the blockchain space for learner wallets, having credentials in it, and the Trusted Learner Network. And so I think that for us, the 3 to 5 years from now, and it might not even be 3 to 5 years from now, is individuals being able to port these credentials in a learner wallet and to be able to own their own education and their own data. And then to be able to stack that and use that in a variety of ways, both for jobs, for upskilling, for finding pathways for themselves that get them to their goals, whatever their goals may be, whether that's in the industry or whether that's just a personal goal, right? We all are focused on really people getting jobs in higher ed, but sometimes people just have personal goals that they want to achieve as well. So I think that it should be based on whatever the individual's goal is and how they want to use their data, how they want to stack it, and how they want to display it. And so this is one of the foundational steps to get to that point, because if we don't have an interoperable set of taxonomies and a standard data set, then it's very difficult to move forward in all of these things that we really want to happen for the future. I think the other thing is having a flexible taxonomy where we can continue to add skills as they become interesting and in the forefront in the future. There are skills of tomorrow that we don't know that are going to exist today. And so these taxonomies constantly need to be growing, changing, evolving. And I think that having a tool that enables us to do that and then reset the alignments is really important.
Yeah.
Colin, and that's a great point, Heather. I just want to jump in and say that I'm not sure whether you're following the chat inside the space where our folks are, but I know that they had a question for Val to drop the link from the standard you mentioned into the chat. And if you're not in the other room, you can do it in this one and I'll carry it over if you'd like.
Yeah, there are multiple chats going on right now. There's one in the actual presentation through the live stream, and then there's one through Teams that I see is fueling as well. There was one in there that was mentioned at Val that I think connects pretty directly to one of the questions that we wanted to throw out to the panel. So we'll kind of put them together. So the question was, how, to Val specifically, how can the great work this team has led inform, sorry to keep scrolling here, how can it inform and drive Canada's new investments in modernizing being led by the Labor Market Information Council? And I think that connects to some of the skills economy on a larger scale.
Val, you're on mute.
Thank you. I was saying what a great question. And I think the reason for that is this is what makes the work of the Open Skills Network so exciting, is the fact that you can connect into live market data. So whether it's through the LMIC or whether it's through MZ, this notion of real-time labor market data, we can link that to the metadata of these rich skill descriptors in the sense that it creates a dynamic skill record. So rather than have something that's stagnant and always looking back in the past, we can have something that is dynamic and evolving, and that creates a real live depiction of the relevancy of, and that's what we start getting into talking about the value and currency of a skill. Part of that is going to be around demand, and we have to tap into the data that we have available to us in order to maximize that, I think.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point there about value and what is value, and that I think has become sort of a guiding question through a lot of this work is, what is value? How do we quantify it? How do we qualify it? And where? How do you create value out of something that doesn't historically have a clear value attached to it? And so I'm curious here how some of this work, does it level the playing field, or does it help to level the playing field for learners and earners? Is there value for all learners that now starts to equalize across the global spectrum? And maybe, Naomi, you want to step into this one, thinking about some of the competencies and universal competencies that you helped to create with the Design Lab through the pilot work. How do you see that impacting what value is and how that offers opportunity for all learners?
So the information behind the skills communicates what's inherent in that skills and tells what that skill is about. As employers, as education institutions, we have to decide whether pedigree, educational pedigree, and social networks are more important, or what someone really knows and can do is the most important element. And if it's what someone knows and can do, then being able to track the skills into some sort of format, learner record, learner wallet, then allows to communicate what that individual knows and can do, regardless of how, whether it's a digital credential, whether it's a boot camp, whether it's a higher ed, whether it's a degree, whether it's a certification. It then gets down to the skills of what someone knows and can do. If you can't tell, I get really excited about this. In that general session, the chat was going great, and this is an exciting dialogue, right? And we're all here at the ground floor. One of the things I want to make clear is you hear my brilliant fellow panelists talking about what this can do, myself as well. Our pilot, though, I want to make kind of clear, our pilot was about the infrastructure needed to support where we want to go. The where we want to go is now that we have these skills libraries, these collections that are in all 3 of our organizations here and the 14 across the pilot, we now have to figure out how do we put this into practice with learners, because earners, because the Open Skills Network itself and the Open Skills Management tool is not a learner data system. It merely is cataloging. It's that infrastructure of data and information. Credential Engine historically has had the information about programs and credentials. This is the information about your skills infrastructure, and it allows for that communication. Now we need excited employer partners to do the same. We need excited higher ed institutions and nonprofits and the technology folks that were my collaborators on my project to figure out how do we piecemeal all this together so that we can equalize that playing field for that individual to be known for their skills.
Can I make one comment on that as well? I think that what you're saying is foundational, is that we are really setting up the infrastructure. We're not even at the point of the end user yet, right? Like the end user is any learner. And I think that if we're not careful and we don't think about what the end user needs, and that end user, the learner, as you mentioned, Naomi, could be anyone, anywhere, we can easily reinforce what the old historical models are by creating systems that then use the RSDs only for individuals who are already in higher ed or in a job or in a big employer that actually deploys it. So we still have to work on, it's not that once we do this, we can all sit back and say, hey, we did this. We have to actively keep working to make sure that all learners are included and that we are actually reaching people and not creating systems at the end user point that reinforce old models.
Yeah, there is a lot of excitement in the work that we're doing, and it's as if you all are looking at my notes about the different pieces and how we bring all of those together, because I think some of what was just mentioned here in terms of alignment and how infrastructure and technology can serve this, I think that will be the next question, but I want to mention a couple things as I see our time dwindling down. A number of people in the chat are very interested in connecting with our panelists here. I think a very general way to connect is finding them on LinkedIn or finding them through their organization. Our panelists, please, if you would feel free, you can put some of your contact information into the chat. But I do want to sort of bring this back into more of the ecosystem, sort of that global perspective as we wrap up our final minutes here. And feel free for everybody to kind of take a final pass here and offer your thoughts on the larger ecosystem. And what we'll use as the question or the prompt for this is how technology or infrastructure can help to serve all this work that you all did with your pilot teams. And I think Charmaine and Heather and the ASU team really showed, look at these different silos even within an institution that have to align and work together, right? You've got designers, you've got technologists, you've got educators, you've got professors, all these different groups that are creating rich skill descriptors together. How do you see technology really supporting and elevating that work for the learner and earner at the end?
Was that to all of us, or who did that one go to?
Well, I don't want to put anyone on the spot. Someone felt inspired to grab onto that one. Go for it.
I can say, so each one of us, of the 4 institutions represented here, each one of us, or 3 institutions, each one of us probably calls these skills something else. For me, it's 21st century skills. For others, it's transferable skills, it's durable skills, it's power skills, it's employability skills, essential skills. I could keep going, right? And we all are trying to stay away from the soft skills, but that's what everyone identifies them as, right? And so those meaningful skills, and this is where it empowers across industries. It's important across job roles. Critical thinking you're not going to find in one particular job role or one industry, and it spans across. The technologies is how, as the technologies consume and are able to take in these rich skill descriptors with the information behind those rich skills descriptors, they can then tag content, they can communicate it across learning records, whether we're talking on the employment side from the application and the hiring process, in through the assessment process, the evaluation process, the advancement process, the training. On the education side, we could talk about the same thing. But if the technologies have not absorbed these libraries and collections with the frameworks that we're saying is important, then it's going to be very difficult for all of you that want to get started on implementation and scaling. It becomes very manual, and we've all struggled with the manual. And so having the technologies are absolutely instrumental to provide the means of taking this infrastructure and streamlining it out in a way that can be utilized by all of our organizations.
And I'll just jump in too. Oh, so I would also just say, thinking about that, even from the fact that the technology is kind of an equalizer of helping everybody understand what it is that they're getting at the end of the day with the education that they would like to get, right? And it makes it really clear and makes it really obvious as to what you might get. And one of the things that I really focus on is the fact that when a student goes into any kind of class situation, they ask, how can I understand what this will get me when I'm out of here? Right. And that's what I really think that this technology has the capability of doing is demystifying this, making it more transparent, what it is, and transfer the ideas as this is what I'm learning here in a class, and this is how I can use it out in whatever it is that I want to use this out for. So.
I would love this conversation to continue. We just got our time warning there, but hopefully our listeners were able to glean some wisdom from this team. Incredible work that was done throughout the spring pilots from not just these four, but they represent such large groups and large organizations who, I can tell you from the amount of effort and communications and correspondence throughout this all, they care deeply about the work that they're doing and are really paving and pioneering a path for all, and the openness to this, and some of the organizations that are out there, please connect and find an opportunity to get involved and bring this to your organization or continue the work that you're doing. But thank you, Naomi, Charmaine, Heather, and Val for the bright conversation, the insight into the work that you did with your teams, and for all of the Spring Skills pilot work for part of the Open Skills Network. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And we hope we'll move on to a next session. To go to your next session, you actually have to disconnect from this one, go back into the main conference hall and select another breakout session. And we hope that you do that right now, and we'll see you in other sessions. Take care.